Welcome back to the Lisbonian Lifestyle. I'm your host, Igor and I'd like to share with you the real story of how I got classified mentally unfit by the Israeli army. I'll tell you exactly what happened in my early childhood and then my late teens, exactly when my parents wanted me to become an army officer, a soldier, but a high ranking one, and exactly what I've done and why I've done it to get out of that system. So enjoy. I'm Igor and this is the List Building Lifestyle, the podcast for anyone who wants to build a wildly profitable email list working from home. If you'd like to make six figures, travel the world, and help people improve their lives in the process, this podcast is for you. I also invite you to claim a free copy of my best-selling book, The List Building Lifestyle: Confessions of an Email Millionaire, at igorsbook.com. Get the free book plus $3,000 bonus package that includes my best capture page templates, email swipe files, and traffic blueprints. Visit www.igorsbook.com for details. And now, it's time to claim your list building lifestyle. So my dad was in the military. He graduated from the Suvorov College for young adults or something. I don't recall exactly what it was called, but it was basically if you wanted to be a proper army man in the Soviet army, in the Red Army, before the wall came down, that was the place to go. There's only one school in the whole of Russia. It was called the Suvorov Academy or something, and he graduated with flying colors. And as soon as you graduate the Suvorov Academy, you enlist as an officer, as like you don't enlist as a private. You kind of go through the basic training and everything, but you enlist as a proper commanding officer. And eventually he got sent to Ukraine because he's originally Russian, to a town called Bila Tsirkva, where he's stationed, and that's where myself and my brother were born. Now, then, fast forward a couple of years, when I was 12, my family decided to immigrate to Israel, and the first couple of years I went to religious school for immigrants. It's actually a special school where they taught you mostly in Russian. They still taught you all the stuff, all the good stuff like math and physics and stuff, but they also had half a day program for Jewish religious shenanigans. Basically, I've done everything. I've put on the tefillin. I prayed before I would eat and first thing in the morning, and I obeyed all the rules and the laws of the religion. The only thing I didn't do was the Shabbat service because there's no school in Shabbat. They couldn't make me, but everything else, I was doing it pretty much. So I was a good student. I was an A student, and I never rebelled against my teachers or anything like that until later in life. But then that school could only last for 2 years. And when I graduated that school, which was sort of like an in between school, I'd say, between the fifth and the seventh grade, um, my parents basically told me, look, we can either send you to this boarding school in Haifa, which is about 3.5 hours away from where I lived, where I would go there and I would study there and I would live there. And it was also a religious school, by the way. So I would have to do the Shabbat service and everything, which I wasn't really looking forward to. Although I did go to that school to check it out and I passed the entry exams with flying colors. But then they said, okay, well, in that case, you should go to the Air Force Academy, which was in a different town, but I would basically take the bus about 90 minutes each way, but I wouldn't have to like stay in school, and it's not a boarding school. I could go home every day, but I would still wear proper military uniform and everything, and I would be treated like a soldier as far as discipline's concerned, as far as my duties as a soldier. So I went there, and there was like a 3-day entry exam process where they did all kinds of testing on you. They made you go through all kinds of little tests and exams and psychometric assessments and psychological assessments, and it was like you had to really qualify. Like I remember there were about 250 of us applying that year, and I think only 90 made it into the school. So they I mean they really, yeah, they really made sure they only got the best. Although, of course, as soon as you get in, you realize that the bar was kind of low, with all the people that were going to school with me. Because by the end of the first year, another 20% would eventually be cut. But I passed all the cuts, and I was never nervous about passing the cuts. I think I always knew I was a smart kid. I was told by my parents. I think that the one thing that my parents did well was they always reminded me that I was smart, and I think that really stuck. And then I spent the next 6 years in that academy, wearing the uniform and being a good soldier. And I graduated the 12th grade, then did 2 more years, so kind of like a college level, further down the same path. And then I was destined for a career in the military, because anyone who graduates from that academy would ensure they would have a great future in the military. But the problem is that the last year in that academy, I stumbled into the Rich Dad Poor Dad book by Robert Kiyosaki, and I realized I didn't want to do the army anymore. Like I realized that message was pushed on me. It wasn't really my dream; it was my parents' dream, and it wasn't really a dream either. It was more like we are, my mom and my dad looking back on their past, and kind of asking themselves, when was life the best, when did they feel most secure. And it was throughout the years when my dad was in the army, because at the downfall of Soviet Union, just before the downfall, one of the few people who did well were people who served in the army, because they had access to resources. Like, and today I guess it's okay to mention this, but back in the day my dad actually stole a lot of food from the army, not because we were starving, but because that was the advantage he had. And what's interesting is that you can't really steal unless you cut in everyone. So almost every single superior he had got a cut of everything he took. So if he took even a bunch of produce, like, I don't know, like buckwheat, it's a big deal, still is in Russia, yeah, where people really appreciate it. Buckwheat is a big deal. It's like, in I remember reading this article about COVID, where in Australia people stocked up on toilet paper right when the big news hit. In Russia, everyone stocked up on buckwheat, like number one. Just disappeared the first day. It disappeared. You couldn't get any. So anyway, whenever my dad would get anything, so you have to imagine a guy trying to sneak out with, say, 10 kilos of buckwheat in a big sack. He would actually get 3 or 4 sacks of buckwheat, and then he would just go to his superior's office, his commanding officer, and put a sack into his car. And then he would, do the same for the superior's superior, and he would basically ensure that everyone up the chain would be taken care of. Anytime he would get anything, and that's how he got away with it. He could always get away with pretty much anything, because he cut everyone else in. So if anything happened, they would always cover for him. And but that was like the state of things. That was like the state of the that was the norm for that society. Yeah. So my parents kind of looked at that time, and compared to our first 10 years in Israel, that was a good time, because the first 10 years in Israel, we struggled bad. I mean, we really, really struggled. We literally had to live on handouts. Our bank balance was always negative. And I know, because at that age, I was the only one in the family who spoke Hebrew. And my parents refused to learn Hebrew because they were either lazy or they were just emotionally too much with all the immigration. And I was the one who would take my parents by the hand and go to the bank and go to social services. So I knew exactly what was going on behind the scenes. I knew exactly what our bank balance was and how negative it was. I knew exactly what the credit card debt was. I knew exactly how many loans we took to cover that credit card debt and paid, all the penalties and then surcharges. I knew exactly whether my dad qualifies for disability or unemployment. I knew all of it because I was the one filling out the paperwork. and it sucked. I mean, I feel I grew up really, really fast because of it, and kind of missed out on quite a few stages of my childhood. But they looked at our life and they said, "Well, we know that if you're part of the government structure, if you're in the military, you're going to be well taken care of." That was the philosophy anyway. So they pushed that message on me. They pushed that message on my brother. And by the time I read Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, I realized I it wasn't mine. Like, I didn't want to do it, and so at that point, already having gone into the real army service, I rebelled against it. And this is the moment when I, for the very first time in my life, I rebelled against the system, and I really wanted to get out of the system. Like before that, I would feel comfortable in the system. I would feel comfortable in a frame of some sort. Like I didn't appreciate or enjoy the idea of being free. But I quickly discovered that as an entrepreneur, um, I thrive in freedom. In fact, one of the few primary goals in my life is the feeling of freedom and expansion and progress. And that's something you can't get if you're stuck in a bureaucratic giant bureaucratic machine, which the army actually is. It's not a fighting mechanism. It's a giant bureaucratic monster, and if you're in, getting out of it is really, really difficult. So as far as the lessons learned throughout my service, well, if I guess a couple of lessons come to mind. First off, people who are in that system will actually fight to protect it, in a way kind of like the Matrix movie, where the Matrix has the agents that are built to keep everyone in the Matrix, and anyone who tries to get out of the Matrix, they want to kill them. In a way, if you're making any attempts whatsoever to get out of the structure, out of the system, that is the fate that awaits you. They're literally trying to stop you any way possible. They will lie to you. They will try to convince you that you made a mistake. They'll try to punish you by throwing you into military jail, where I spent some time as well, because they really couldn't find a different way to stop me. But eventually, while that was a lesson in and of itself, another lesson I learned is that the system is built to support itself, and the moment you start breaking it, it can't it kind of spits you out, in a way where if you don't fit into that system and they can't make you fit into the system, as long as you are leveraging the system's rules against it, you will get out. In fact, I think something I was telling people shortly after getting out was, that in order to get out of the Israeli army, I had to get in first, because there was a brief spell of about 6 months or maybe a year where, which is when I met my wife to be. By the way, I was basically MIA, right? So they were looking for me. Military police was looking for me, but I was trying to stay low and to stay kind of under the radar. And I was just working, some odd jobs. That's when I met my wife. So when I got back into the army, um I spent the first 6 months just trying to break the system, and to basically say I will not conform to your rules. And but that didn't work. What eventually worked was to recognize that a system, kind of like an algorithm, works under the if then conditions, and the people in the system will always have to honor those conditions and those protocols. And eventually I got out through a psychiatric assessment. Actually, it took me a few months after realizing that that's the way I want to do it. But I basically gradually went from being a fully fit soldier to being, almost like an unfit soldier, which reduced my profile within the system, and therefore made me a less attractive candidate to advance further in a career within the structure of the military. But then, what the final blow was when I decided that now the next step that I made myself physically unfit. And I would do some crazy things, like I would actually, go and tell my superiors that I wet my bed. I would threaten, people. Obviously we had to carry a rifle, right? So I threatened my superior. I threatened my fellow soldiers, but just the ones that I didn't like much, not the ones that I was friends with. And I kind of made it clear to them that I was mentally unstable, and then I continuously kept on requesting to see a shrink. But the way the system works is they know that people try to get out that way, so they prevent you from seeing the shrink by saying, yeah, yeah, you'll see the shrink, yeah, yeah, we'll let you know when. And they never actually let you see one. And the way you get to one is by basically taking it to the extreme. You become such a giant misfit that they can't help anymore but to take you to the shrink, almost by grab you by the hand and take you to the shrink. So eventually, that's how I got out. I finally got me several psychiatric assessments, a total of three assessments that I had to go through. And I had to keep to my story. I had to really develop a character for a depressed and unstable individual. I started telling them things like, I get drunk and I violently, hit my wife or something. I started making up a lot of that stuff. And I really got into the character. I just realized that I am to take this to the extreme as far as I can take it. Otherwise, they're not going to take me seriously. Because I mean, the way they built the system is, if you're sort of kind of complaining, no one's going to listen. If you're sort of kind of asking for something, you're never going to get it. But if you're going through extreme like actions, and you really just go out of your own way, and then they have to, like, it's just something they can't ignore, because you ruin it for everyone else, because you start inspiring other rebels. So yeah, there were many times that I told my superior to go fuck himself. There were many times when I just left. you know like, it's a closed military facility, but I just left. And I took my gun with me too, my rifle, although I had no permission to do it. They put me in jail. I got out of jail. They sent me to trial, to military trial. And they said, basically, stop doing it. That was the message: stop doing it, or we're going to throw you into, you're going to go to jail for a long time, which the maximum term is 6 months. But I was so desperate to get out that I was like, you know what, if I have to pay 6 months to get out of an army service that would otherwise keep me there for 3 to 5 years, I'm willing to pay that. I'm willing to pay that, although again, I didn't really want to go to jail. But at the time, I was pretty much willing to do anything, because I knew that I was in a bad place. That wasn't for me. I was missing out on life. I already knew what internet marketing was, and I wanted to build my business. And I just had different plans. And for the first time in my life, I actually felt encouraged that I could go and pursue them. That my needs were above the needs of the state. That my needs were above the opinion of my mother. That my needs mattered more than whatever anyone else told me that I should be thinking. And I think that served me well. One obvious positive for me was discipline. One thing that this sort of structure instills in you is a sense of discipline, and a sense of completing the assignments and the tasks you are given. But I was always like that. So Army kind of highlighted it for me, but I was always like that even when I was a kid. Like, you never had to remind me that I needed to do my homework. You never had to ask me twice to go take out the trash. Like, I was super sensitive to my responsibilities as a member of a unit, be it my family, be it the inner circle that I belong to in my social relationships, or be it in the army in my platoon. Like, I was never the one to keep others waiting. I was never the one to otherwise betray the trust of my army buddy who relied on me. Like, if me and a buddy of mine went on to, say, do rounds, right? and he wanted to just sleep a bit, like I would actually take responsibility and say, okay, you'll sleep, I wake up in 20 minutes, then we switch up. Like there was never a scenario where someone couldn't rely on me. And I think that is one of the reasons why it was so difficult for me to embrace the absolute opposite behavior that would be required for me to get out, because it required me to take a big stinking steaming dump on pretty much everyone around me. I had to ignore everyone else's needs. I had to ignore my superiors. I had to ignore my friends. I mean, it even got to a point where I lost friends. They just didn't get me. Like one of my best buddies back then in the academy. Also, his name is also Igor. He's also from Ukraine. Like he just stopped talking to me. He stopped picking up the phone. He thought I went crazy, and he didn't want to. He didn't want to continue that friendship. And even though he recognized that I was doing this with a purpose, he basically couldn't accept it. So. Thank you for listening to The List Building Lifestyle. Get access to the previous episodes, transcript of today's show, as well as other exclusive content at listbuildinglifestyleshow.com. Also remember to claim your free copy of my best-selling book at www.igorsbook.com. It explains how I made millions with list building starting from scratch. Plus, I'll give you $3,000 worth of free bonuses, including my best landing page templates, email swipe files, and traffic blueprints. Go to www.igorsbook.com now to claim your free package.